Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Weather Center Nazario. It is Thursday, Friday Eve. We are on the cusp of yet the first weekend of October 2023. We're starting things off with the 12Z GFS over the United States this time, because take a look at what we have forming up over the Great Plains and then moving across the eastern United States all together as a whole. As this loop continues to rapidly sequence back and forth from the start to finish, you see that first system move its way off the northeast coast, wrapping up with Philippe, and then take a look at what starts to deepen down right over the Central Plains and then affect thousands upon thousands of people as that frontal line extends all the way up through the Great Lakes, through the Northeast, and into the eastern Canadian provinces. Fall is in full effect, folks. Let me go ahead and stop the loop and let's start talking about this. So, as we go back in time, what I want you to watch first and foremost on the eastern side of your screen, or I should say the right side of the screen, this is Philippe right in through here. This is the GFS, and I'm seeing a lot of conflicting information with the HAFS-A and B models, the H-WRF, the Euro, the Icon. All of our models are doing some very distinctive things with this feature because of the fact that it's going to wrap up in that little vortex of cooler air, that cold pocket that we identified on the water vapor shot yesterday. As you track it through time and you go up towards its potential landfall in the northeast, we do see a very tight pressure gradient with it. This is no cause for alarm. There are going to be some elevated winds with this event, anywhere between 50 to 60 miles an hour. We can anticipate the same with Bermuda impacts here within the next 6 to 12 hours, which I'll get to here in a moment. But what's very interesting that I've been noticing on a lot of the models too is as it wraps up with our next polar system moving across Ontario and Quebec, look at all that snowfall and that wraparound cold air that it continues to pull down from the northern Canadian territories. You can see a thickness of 534. I would imagine that the 520 line is somewhere mixed in there as well, which is usually indicative of very dense polar air, very low, shallow, high pressure air, if you will, across the James Bay, Hudson Bay area, way down from the northern portions of Canada. So that is some very dense cold air wrapping up into this system. I thought it was a very fun fact today to start the video off with a pure transition from tropical all the way to as non-tropical as you could possibly get, because unlike with Lee, if you guys remember my video segments with that storm, we had everything going on alongside Ophelia. We had everything going on for what would look like a fall winter time system minus the snow. Well, in this case, with Philippe mixing in with our baroclinic system up there, we got everything. So it's going to be very interesting to see exactly how this continues to unfold. This is going to be a widespread rain snow event for much of the eastern Canada. Anywhere in the northeast, you could probably see some good amounts of rainfall with it, some wraparound snowfall, maybe even a little bit of lake effect, depending on how much of that cold air gets pulled in across the upper Great Lakes into the northeastern states. Lots to bear monitoring, nothing in the way of heavy, severe weather. We're not talking about anything extreme tropical storm-like conditions or anything borderline hurricane. A lot of our models are anticipating what looks to be more of a nor'easter type setup. We could see some power outages, widespread heavy rain, of course. The winds are not going to be a very credible threat, and we'll talk about Bermuda here in a second, because a lot of those impacts, minus the wintry effects, are going to play the same role out there. And then before we move on, I just want to show you one last time, right over there, you can see that 987 low deepen down right over top of Kansas, Oklahoma, and begin to work its way up towards the Great Lakes area. This is a classic fall/winter time event. You can see a very good frontal signature right in through here, pushing across the front range of the Rockies, making it all the way through the Four Corners, Desert Southwest, which for us down there when I was forecasting for the 25th Operational Weather Squadron, that was a clear indicator that we had a very strong front coming through. So if anything, this is going to be a lot more intense and a lot more severe likely than what we see with Philippe going into the northeast. So I would want to maybe pay more attention to what happens over west and central Conus, because with that dense cold air wrapping up into what we could see as a little bit of marginal return flow over the southeast quadrant of the United States, we could see a very good line of severe weather anywhere in the Great Plains area. You can see that there is a good amount of snow indications across the northern plains, the Intermountain West, especially the front range of the Rockies. And if you guys look closely, this is an interesting feature I was really excited to share with you. Take a look at all that troughing that's going on along the front range of the Rocky Mountains in particular. That right there is called lee side troughing. And what's happening is 700 millibars and up, you have the jet running across those terrain features in a perpendicular fashion. That's very dangerous for folks who live out in the Colorado Springs, Denver area, further to the north into the front range of Wyoming as well. Even in parts of Montana, Idaho can see situations like that as well, although the jet looks to be a little bit further to the south in this case, so we're seeing it over the upper Four Corners region. And what that does is it can, within seconds, guys, I'm not joking, within seconds induce winds above 50, 60 knots, depending on how much momentum you have crossing those terrain features and how much of it can come all the way down to the surface. In this case, you have a momentum transfer event occurring, which is very, very dangerous for low-lying objects, for people outside in the midst of this, anything unsecured out there, which is why we want to pay close attention to what what actually happens with this, because the pressure gradient is going to be enormous with this system. I would honestly argue that despite Philippe making impacts in Bermuda and the Northeast, bringing in that snow and that elevated wind threat, this is going to be a little more torrential because it's going to affect a massive amount of people, guys. This is going, it's, countrywide almost at this point, and this is what's going to help do some very crazy things, as the title of this video implies, in the tropics. We're going to talk about that here in a second. All right, here we go. Philippe, still a threat. He has strengthened up over the last couple of hours. I know we have winds of 50-ish in the center of circulation right now. We're starting to see that deepening trend we've been forecasting for the last few days. He's getting into a slightly more conducive environment for that intensification, and we're going to start with the H-Wharf, because the H-Wharf has a bit more of a doom and gloom kind of setup with this system as it goes to the north. So you can see it moving right into the island of Bermuda as a 990 tropical storm, trying to further organize and consolidate before that cooler pocket of air in the upper levels can start to shred it and kind of really instigate that transition from tropical to post-tropical. It's going to happen much quicker with this storm than we saw with Hurricane Lee. That is a guarantee, because we already have a bunch of frontal activity and jet activity in the upper levels going on in the atmosphere pretty much everywhere to its west. And that breakaway area of jet energy and shortwave vorticity at 500 millibars is only going to speed that up faster. It moves off to the north, and by now we're already starting to see that tropical transition. You can get a little bit of an indication that we're picking up some frontal activity right in through here and right in through there. That's looking very indicative of what looks to be a warm front starting to develop. You can see the surface reflection of the low I mentioned yesterday starting to pop up to its southwest flank, and as it continues through the end of the loop, you see it try to strengthen and increase the pressure gradient force around this system, and you can see it in the winds. This is a very cool tool right here. You can see all that cold air and increased pressure gradient force around this system pulling wind off of the coastline, at least based on what this model is indicating. We could see anywhere between 55, 65 mile an hour gusts across a large area, and we could see some really good coastal flooding if this pans out and where it makes landfall, according to the H-Wharf, because you can see all that push of wind headed right into the coastline across parts of Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, up towards the New Brunswick, Newfoundland area as well. So we could see some coastal flooding out of this as well if this does come to fruition. All right, we're going to go look at our HAFS A and B models, because these look a lot better and more favorable long-term, not only for Bermuda in the next 6 to 12 hours, but even for the Northeast as well. Let me take you through. So we go through time, and you can see that Philippe tries to further organize, but that cold pocket unfortunately shears it apart, and we don't see too much in the way of intensification. And at this point, you can kind of already see we're going more frontal at this point. You can see this little bit of kinking in the isobars and that bit of an indication of a warm sector, or that lopsided trough, if you will, jutting out to the east. We're already starting to get some frontal support and jet support aloft with this system, so it's already changing its characteristics. And once it finally makes its way up towards the northeast, it tries to get its act together a little bit more intensely, just like the H-Wharf were saying, making landfall a little further to the west, which could definitely create a little bit more coastal flooding conditions for Nova Scotia and the same aforementioned areas I mentioned during the H-Wharf. And then very quickly, guys, you can see it wraps up into that polar vortex, if you will, up over Quebec, moving out of Ontario, just south of the James Bay, Hudson Bay area, and then we just have a giant low, all barotropic in nature at this point. There is no more Philippe once you get to this point in the run. You can see the same thing on the HAFS B. The HAFS B showing a little bit of a weaker indication as well until just before landfall. You get a couple of embedded vortices, almost like a triple point low trying to set up out there as it makes its way inland, and then once again washes out real quick as it gets up into the Canadian provinces and becomes wrapped up in our polar vortex up there, really bringing in all that cooler weather. We'll really quickly switch over to the precipitation. You can see the total precip with this is looking pretty good, and that's because we have that frontal system already dropping rain and snow up there. And then once you mix tropical storm, or at this point post-tropical storm Philippe, into the mix, you're going to see an increase in overall rainfall and snow with this, because you have all that cold air coming down to the left of the storm on the western flank, and then you have all of what's left of the tropical moisture mixing with the cooler air outside that's modified on the eastern half of the storm. So all in all, this is going to be a pretty torrential rain and snow event, but again, I really want us to start fixating on what's happening over the Great Plains, because we're going to see almost the entire country feel some sort of either moderate to severe threat with that system as it comes through. All right, guys, we're going to move on to some probability charts. We're here at the Euro, once again looking at our tropical depression favorability out in the Gulf, and we've honestly been seeing again and again as we've gone through days slow but steady increases in the chances of seeing some kind of development. You can see as of the 12th of October, we're already getting up into those 65-70% thresholds according to the chart on the right-hand side. And as you go forward in time, time, you can see that those chances do start to diminish, but they almost resurge there for a second before moving closer to the Yucatan Peninsula. This lines up really well with what the Canadian and the GFS model is showing, as well as the Korean model once again, and I'm going to show you why, because this is pretty insane, I'm not going to lie to you. So here we are at the 12Z Euro model, okay? This is finally populated. I waited long enough in the day to bring this to you guys. We're looking at 500 millibar vorticity. This way we have a good idea, or a snapshot, if you will, of what the atmosphere is doing in the upper levels, because we've been talking trough axes, moving across the eastern Pacific, scooping up our one system that's potentially developing off the Central American coast. I've personally never seen this before. If you guys have in the past, please drop a comment below. I'd love to get your insight and your feedback on this, but I've never seen this happen in the East Pacific in my entire time dabbling in weather in the last 10, 12 years now. So I want you to watch what happens with not only Lydia, but our extra system upstream of where Lydia is that we've actually been tracking and potentially progging to move into our Gulf of Mexico. Watch as that trough begins to work its way in. The Euro is thinking that not only is one system going to get picked up, but the second system is going to get picked up. Look at how Lydia completely goes full retrograde against the pattern, moves east with that area of troughing. You can see it in the vorticity here, that crisp line of upward vertical motion moving due south over the Pacific. That trough and our major frontal system in the United States as well is what's helping to take these systems on almost a due east path and bring them right back into Mexico. And the problem with that is, guys, they've already had the CAG down there in full effect. Bad flooding, death toll is currently rising. I'm not hyping this up, and to have not one but two cyclones going back to back in that same area not only increases the chance that we might get a 1-2 punch in the Gulf of Mexico, but Mexico, Guatemala, Nicaragua, the Yucatan Peninsula is going to see massive amounts of flooding with this. This is wild, in my opinion. I know you don't like hyperbole, you don't like certain verbiage, but that's pretty crazy to see, and I'm not going to lie to you guys. I've never seen systems in the East Pac, out of all the time I've been watching the tropics down there, that AOR a little bit more than the Atlantic because of where I was stationed. I've never seen them fully retrograde, stop, and then go backwards, put in a reverse like they are. You can see this on our model comparator tool. If you look at both sides, you can see the GFS on the right, the Euro on the left. You can see a really well-defined Lydia out there, and our secondary system starting to take shape. Look at how Lydia goes due east, right back towards, in fact, almost east-southeast, back towards the Mexico landmass. And as you go even further through time, look at what the Euro wants to do. We get that second cyclone that's still an invest area out there, moving into central Mexico, and once it emerges, we have a low beginning to form up and try to deepen as it pushes towards the Gulf Coast. Now, as you go even further through time, you see Lydia begin to make landfall, and on the GFS, since unfortunately this loop ends at 180 hours, on the GFS we have something big come out of there, and you have all those widespread winds moving into the Yucatan Peninsula where it kind of goes stationary and then begins to deepen down and jut back up towards the Central Florida Peninsula. So we could see an instance here, and I'm going to watch this very closely because this is very bizarre. I'm not going to lie to you guys. I've been very hyper-focused on this, trying to make sense of it because we have things going backwards now. You know, I've seen things do loop-de-loops and turns and, you know, all that fun jazz, but now we have things just like, you know, I'm going to go this way real quick. So this could be very, you know, anomalous, very erroneous for our Gulf of Mexico AOR. Now the Euro is predicting we could see a potential system moving into the Louisiana-Mississippi coastline and then a second one headed towards Florida. So maybe everybody could get a taste of what the last little Hail Mary of the tropics has in store for us before we clear out. And before I conclude, guys, we are still watching our little entity, our area of investigation out there for the National Hurricane Center, highlighted at a 30% chance of development over the next 7 days. We're back on the GFS, and you can see as that mess continues to go on in the Gulf of Mexico, what the models are starting to do with our system. And I've been kind of seeing this the last couple of days on the Euro as well, which is why I'm a little astonished that National Hurricane Center jumped on that before whatever we have going on in the Caribbean and the Gulf, because the Euro has very low confidence we're going to get anything really organized out of that. We might get a very brief instance of a depression, maybe a very low-grade named storm, just to check another name off of our list. But even the GFS now is on track with that, really quickly going up to the north with all that lowering pressure that's trying to erode that pretty potent North Atlantic high out there. Like, don't get me wrong, that's a really good blocking high out there. It's just we have so many cyclonic features in these very strong frontal systems coming off the coast, it can't really fully cement itself across the Atlantic as a whole. So you can see very quickly we have something form up as it comes off of the African African coast, deeping down into a depression, maybe a very weak tropical storm, and then as soon as it shows up, it's gone just like that. So I'm going to continue to pay attention to it because we still have a large ensemble spread. There's still a lot of lead time. That's towards the very middle to late end of the run for all of our models. So it goes without saying, we're going to keep an eye on it, and I know other sources are going to continue to track it out as well, and to include National Hurricane Center, the subject matter expert, but I wanted to briefly touch on that before it seems like I forgot about it altogether. We'll go ahead and wrap up this Thursday iteration of Weather Center Nazario. Thank you guys for tuning in. I know this was a little bit rushed. I'm a little low on time. I wanted to make sure to get this out to you guys, give the Euro some time to populate so we can get an idea of what's happening out there. The Gulf of Mexico is ready. The Gulf of Mexico is wide open, and they've completely discontinued any kind of toll fees, so whatever comes out of the Pacific, especially going backwards like it is going to have free reign to run right up in through there to the Gulf Coast, if not the Central Florida Peninsula. Definitely a lot to keep an eye out. We're definitely in a very confusing point, not only in the tropical season, but the transition season as we get into the full force of fall, and this could be an indication of what winter has in store for us now that El Nino is starting to strengthen as well. We'll see you guys soon. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and until next time, this is Weather Center Nazario, signing out.